Welcome to this special program from ABC Victoria. Tonight we'll leave the politicians alone and hear from people who work every day to tackle family violence.
Did the child witness the violence?
Yes.
Okay. How old is the child?
8.
Not good.
From police and social workers to the counsellors manning the phones.
I'm glad I come to work today because that man realised that his children were watching him be violent to their mother.
To the teachers in our classrooms.
You're the ones who are going to make sure that this evil social disease of domestic violence disappears.
And the survivors who are finding their collective voice.
Because we're making no excuses.
One person's story of family violence is everyone's story.
Let's raise our voices proudly.
Well, the Royal Commission's job is done, but there's still a lot of hard work ahead. Shortly, we'll discuss some of the many recommendations for ending family violence. But it's important to remember that for the past year, the Commission's main job has been to listen. Behind more than 1,000 submissions were complex but very personal stories, like these from survivors Audrey and Jennifer.
The idea of that the home was a safe place. And to me, after a while, I didn't think it was. I felt safer on the outer side of the front door.
When I had hands around my throat, I didn't care if I died. It was a choice between being with my child or living. I didn't care. I think mums can understand that.
His unhappiness, he felt he had the right to offset that to everybody else, to the point where it just got nasty. And I put up with it to keep everyone happy.
So I've lost my home, my child, and now I'm losing the very little bit of money I've got on pursuing court. Then to make it worse, when you finally have the courage to put in an affidavit, what has occurred, the other person adjourns. And now they know the information in your affidavit. So for women in much worse situations than me, that must be frightening.
For a long time, I thought that the verbal psychological abuse was normal. And it's not until it turns physical that it is actually defined as abuse. And looking back now and reading a lot more into family violence, I see that that's not the case. And unfortunately, it's not until you see somebody with a bruised eye or a bruised arm that that's when notice is taken.
How could this happen to you? You know, like maybe someone who's on heroin or drinking or this or that, but how did it happen to you? And now I never thought it could. I thought I had this belief in, the system, the government, they'll do what's right. By the time they get around to doing what's right, it's too late. The damage is done.
Well, too late for many, but what about the future? Here to discuss the way forward is Victoria Police Assistant Commissioner Dean McWhirter, who leads Australia's first Family Violence Command Unit. Social justice lawyer Paula Shelton, who's represented the families of victims like Luke Batty and Kelly Thompson, amongst others. And Alice Cokes, who manages the Salvation Army's Family Violence Service. Well, Dean McWhirter, first to you, 227 recommendations from the Royal Commission, a lot of scrutiny about the police response. What are you going to be your top priorities?
For Victoria Police, we're going to be focused on 3 key elements of that review. Firstly, it's about establishment of the Centre of Learning for Family Violence within Victoria Police. This will provide us with contemporary ongoing education of our members in terms of the complexities and challenges of family violence and what victims face. And what we know, that will actually change our response to victims of family violence. Additionally, we would see that we will be looking at the introduction of mobile terminals, which is essentially a tablet or a computer in the field. This will enable our members to directly enter data from that victim, going through a rigorous risk assessment process, gathering really thorough information to improve our response.
And up-to-date information.
Absolutely. And then ultimately, the next phase, what we will be looking at is a trial in relation to body-worn cameras. What that will do is allow our members to record the actual evidence from a victim, take their statement at a family violence incident or shortly afterwards, and that actually recording will become their evidence in chief in court, which will mean they won't have to give evidence in court, and that will be an absolutely huge benefit to victims right through the whole process.
Paula Shelton, you've had close contact with tragedies caused by system failures. What recommendations will stop that happening?
Well, the recommendations refer to justice that is swift and justice that is certain. And one of the main issues that we need to address is the use and the enforcement of intervention orders. If a woman takes the step of getting an intervention order and then it's not enforced, it's a bit of paper, and in fact what it does is puts her in a much worse position than she was to start with, because she's challenged the perpetrator's power and they're enraged, and you ring the police, they don't come, or they're not charged, or there's no result from that. And we really have to concentrate on perpetrator accountabilities in this process, because that's something that's really been missing. And I think in both Luke's inquest and in Kelly's inquest, it was almost like the perpetrators were absent. There was so much concentration on what did Kelly do, you know, what did Rosie do, well, what did Greg do, what did Wayne do? That's all we need to look at.
Okay. Alice Cokes, the report acknowledges that too many agencies aren't working together properly. What's going to change now?
Look, I think the Royal Commission's really focused on this area and the fact that for women and children the system is fragmented. It's difficult to find services that they need and to go through the right doorways. This is, if all of this comes to light, what we're going to see is an opportunity for women to get into the system quicker. They're going to get a response no matter which doorway they enter. So should they disclose to a health professional, should they disclose to the police, it doesn't matter. They should be able to enter the system this way. And what we should be seeing is police, family violence specialist agencies, child protection, the system working together through these information sharing changes that they're proposing to get better risk and safety measures in place for women and children.
An experiment in better integration has been underway in Melbourne South for more than a year. The Salvation Army has embedded a social worker with police to take a more proactive approach to stopping repeat offenders. Let's find out more about Task Force Alexis.
The aim was to make sure that we had a holistic approach to family violence. That's why we've come together, so that we have one point of call and we're appropriately using those services. Rather than having 10 different people engaging with that one family, by the 10th phone call, that victim or offender or child, whoever it may be, is no longer wishing to engage because they've been bombarded.
So I've gone over what's occurred last night. I think there's 3 incidents that probably need our attention.
How serious are the risk factors?
There was strangulation.
Not good.
And there was a child involved.
I always attend for the first time with police. Where when you present in person and you actually present with a police person, it's a lot more difficult not to actually engage with me. Any family violence program that I've engaged with before, I haven't ever worked with the respondent. So that's one of the real differences.
We have brought together the proactive policing unit with the family violence unit. And so when we go out and we do a warrant or anything in relation to a particular house, we have the experience and the expertise of a firearms officer. A crime prevention officer can conduct a safety audit on a victim's house.
I have been well and truly read my pedigree, but no, I've never actually had anybody throw me off the property. So I'll ring St Kilda and find out if there's been anybody engaging or any referrals made, see if there's any history there, see if there's anything that we haven't picked up.
That'd be great.
I think Task Force Alexis has been extremely successful in the sharing of information for the betterment and safety of the person.
It has made a difference to how we case manage our families, because police can't do everything and nor can the social workers. So we need to come together to have that collaborative approach for a successful outcome.
How old's the child?
8.
This is a recidivist family, so this child was there, saw the violence?
Yes.
One of the saddest things is when people actually have been exposed to family violence for so long that it has become the norm.
You shouldn't have to lose your home or your job because of an abusive relationship, but for many, that is the stark reality. The issue was highlighted in a submission to the Royal Commission from Victoria's only round-the-clock refuge for women and children made homeless by family violence.
I believe family violence is a human rights issue. I believe all people should be safe in their own homes. What I think we need to focus very strongly on is a comprehensive, fully resourced Safe at Home program. What we're doing to women and children by bringing them out of their homes is we're interrupting their capability to flourish. So women are more likely to be carers of children and less likely to sleep on the streets. So what they will do is that they will sleep in cars, they will sleep they will go to other people's houses, and that's known as couch surfing. They might stay in overcrowded situations, and they might stay with a violent offender. Women who are coming to homelessness from family violence often have homes but can't live in them safely. So in their minds, they actually don't even think of themselves as homeless. So what we're seeing is that whilst in our laws and in our policies, we're starting to talk about this concept of women remaining home safely, it's not happening in practice. Certainly not happening in practice in anywhere near the numbers that we would expect. They couldn't get work, they were prevented from getting work because they were performance managed out of a previous job, partly because they hadn't revealed their situation to their employers, and the perception of the employers was their productivity had dropped or their absenteeism was a problem. If employers quite simply understood the full impact of family violence on their employees, they could prevent employees slipping out of the workforce and potentially staying in abusive relationships and also moving into a homeless situation.
Well, let's take some of those issues back to our expert panel. Alice Coates, the Royal Commission wants the government to establish a family violence housing assistance task force. To what extent will that help the problem of access to crisis accommodation, do you think?
Look, I think the housing system is really in dire straits. We know that family violence is the leading cause of homelessness for women and children, and we know that they're staying in inadequate accommodation. Sometimes they're staying in motels for too long, refuge system is clogged and they're staying in there for too long, and then they're going into transitional housing. So for some women they're having 3 or 4 moves before they find stable housing, and the impact on that, on their well-being and their children's well-being, is immense when they're in that housing instability. So hopefully with this task force they will look at all of those layers and understand where the resources need to go, and they will unpack where they want to put the resources next. For example, I know they've raised doing a housing blitz, looking at the social housing options and seeing if we can increase those, but also initiatives like flexible support packages and Safe at Home, as was raised in that video, are ways that we can work with women so they don't have to enter homelessness at all. And we want to be looking at that where it's safe to do so.
OK. Paula, keeping women safe at home is one thing, but what about in court? What do you think of the proposals to make the court experience less adversarial?
I'm strongly in favour of many of those recommendations. I mean, the law in general is alien to most people, let alone when it's about the most intimate things in your life. And we've had a lot of difficulties. Some of them are systemic, I guess, and some of them are physical, just simply in terms of things like safe waiting areas. If you turn up to court for your court case and the first thing you see is the perpetrator in the court and you have to be in the same room with them, that's really problematic and drastically increases the stress and how difficult that process is. We also have to stop the legal system perpetrating the relationship of imbalance between the parties, the power imbalance between the parties, and not letting perpetrators manipulate the system to continue abusing their victims. So adjournments and things like that must be avoided, and if people don't turn up, there should be consequences for that, and there are certainly recommendations that are along those lines as well. But physically in the courts, I think we need to make sure that people are safe, and we also need to avoid situations where one party has to cross-examine the other, and particularly instances where one party is represented and one party isn't, particularly when it's the perpetrator who is represented, and unfortunately that happens quite a lot.
And statements from a remote location?
Statements from a remote location. I think the initiative that Dean was referring to with the cameras is an excellent one.
Dean, how do you feel about the suggestion that police should have the powers to issue intervention orders in the field?
And this is one of the issues that we raised in our submission to the Royal Commission, and we asked them to look at that as an option. In their report, they made a recommendation that we come back and revisit this in 5 years. To their credit, they actually looked at this quite intently. They actually started to dismiss it out of hand, is essentially what they said. But then they went through a process of looking at the pros and cons, and quite readily identified that there were benefits to police and the benefits to the court in terms of taking victims out of the court system. But they just considered that there was a range of other things that needed to be put in place before they were, I suppose, comfortable enough to reconsider this. And so they've put a time frame on government to look at this again in 5 years. However, I think it's now opened the door for this to be explored.
Can I open up a can of worms for you here? Indigenous women are 34 times more likely than other Australian women to present as victims of family violence. In the wake of the Royal Commission, and that's just one case, I suppose, how do we go about addressing sensitively but forthrightly the cultural considerations for different communities, some of them with a very patriarchal mindset?
Look, it's a considerable issue, and it's a considerable issue for policing. How do we reach out to those communities, understand the cultural implications around what family violence means in those communities? It's actually not, it's about the actual Indigenous community, it's about the CORD community, LGBTI communities, women with disabilities. It cuts right across all communities. And it's difficult. It's difficult because of the reluctance to report. It's difficult because of the reluctance of people to go through the court process. It's challenging for all of us in the system who work in this every day to actually get people to come forward, to report, and trying to make them feel safe.
OK, well, the Royal Commission has recognised the need for more resources to support victims, but also offenders. For 2 decades, a group of phone counsellors at the No to Violence Men's Referral Service have challenged perpetrators to examine and change their behaviour. It's an emotionally difficult job, but they reckon they are making a difference.
Did she get upset? She was crying, was she?
The order's issued to you. It's focused on the choices you're making, out of concerns for the well-being of your family.
The typical caller is probably self-righteous, angry, justified, and confused perhaps a little bit, but perplexed about what's happening and what will happen if they go to court and when they go back to court and will they see their kids again. So there's a lot of anxiety, but it's often masked as anger.
You'll generally find that what's in the report is a version, and they're very keen to tell you how innocent they are, how innocent and how much that the system's actually against them, or how misunderstood they are.
Well, they'll minimise it totally, and it was nothing, and then just normalise it. It's everybody. Couples do this. This is the way the world is.
We also must, as part of our work, challenge and confront his thinking and his sense of entitlement and privilege and what's got him to that space, and to keep putting the emphasis back on him about what was it that he did or what is it that he does that contributes to this situation.
if he doesn't get into a program for 3, 4, 6 months, he goes back to normal. He'll then work on her behaviour. He'll work on actually her dropping the order. He'll work on her changing her attitude, and it was just a mistake, I didn't mean it, I'm sorry. And so he'll go back into that honeymoon phase of the relationship where the things will be okay until the next time. All family violence comes from a position of person wants more power. And so if they feel that their power is not being acknowledged, validated, then they'll accelerate their behaviour.
I don't like violence. I don't like seeing people hurt, and that's anybody hurt. Men are hurting themselves by the inaction of not exploring what's going on.
So prevention's better than cure, and at the end of the day, it makes a difference. And every little bit makes a difference.
And changing violent behaviour also means changing attitudes, and education clearly plays a pivotal role. Melbourne High is one school that's adopted the white ribbon anti-violence message as part of its ethos. Let's take a look.
Two times! Hey, hey! Let's go, gentlemen, back on the ball, let's go!
Our behaviour matters off the field as much that it does on the field. It's understanding that there is a, if I can dare say, new masculinity, and what that involves is celebrating diversity, understanding and appreciating that we're all one, however we have many facets.
You've got to be able to see and understand what respect looks like. Men don't hit women because they're drunk. They hit them because they're violent. The Breaking the Silence program is a white ribbon initiative. It's a program we turn out for schools. And this is not about men bashing. This is about creating strong young men as leaders of the future. I would like to see this program across every school in Australia.
She's pretty alright, eh? Mate, come on, that's not alright.
And it's a role play, I know, but how did you feel?
You feel kind of like you've done the wrong thing, that you should just stay quiet.
The hardest thing probably that I took from today was not being silent, because that is a lot harder to do, especially to go to your mates and say that something's not right.
Now that you know that it's there, it's quite confronting.
How often have you heard, oh, he throws like a girl? What's wrong with throwing like a girl? That's the sort of thing that you have to think about. Society makes or pushes young men to look through a man lens.
What's on the whiteboard is shown through society, how boys try and fit inside the box, and as soon as they step outside, they get called names and they get put down, which forces them back inside the box.
Being male is sometimes all about being understanding. It might be being gay. Doesn't make you not male. Generational change is definitely starting to happen. We have young men standing up, even in their own families, saying to Dad, we get stories like this all the time, Dad, that's not right. That's brave. And they do it because they have the confidence of education behind them.
It's all right, let's break it up, break it up, break it up, break it up.
It's our duty to say no to violence against women. It's hopeful for the future, because I think we know that we can change it if we truly put our minds to it.
Nice and loud, boys. High on 3. 1, 2, 3, high!
Well done. Well, things are happening at the federal level too. Ken Lay has headed up the COAG advisory panel on reducing violence against women and children. He delivered his final report today, stressing the need for primary prevention. In other words, a fundamental change in society's mindset. Now, there is a big task for you, Paula. How do we go about chipping away at that one?
Well, look, I think we have to recognise that fundamentally this is about power relationships, and the repeating theme is men's sense of entitlement, even, you know, over a partner who is no longer their partner, and that's where we see these horrible murder-suicides and those kinds of things. I think we all need to call out behaviour, and it's not just physically violent behaviour, it's all sorts of behaviours that are manipulative, and we see it all the time, you know. All sorts of behaviours in our friends, in our families. We all have a responsibility to address that.
I was going to say, it's not exclusively a male problem, though, is it? Just in this sphere, it's predominantly a male problem.
It is predominantly a male problem, but if you look at, say, something like elder abuse or abuse of siblings of each other, it's still the same fundamental power struggle that's going on. And these are discussions that we need to be having in our families, in our schools, in our footy clubs and in our workplaces, because women can't actually stop family violence. It has to come from men. We have to hold men accountable, and we have to call them out on their behaviour, and we have to insist, if necessary, necessary through legal means, that they stop their behaviour, but the responsibility stops with them.
OK. Dean, the Royal Commission has recommended training programs for police officers so that they understand the issue better. Do we need more prominent male role models to assist in that process, from the footy team, from the golf club?
I think we do, but I think your story just highlights the fact that our role models come from our children, and they're the ones that are going to make the change. And I think that's the important message we need to get out there, that as the story said, the change is starting, and it will start with our children, and they will be our role models.
For those of us who are no longer in the education process, where do we go? I mean, I was struck by the example of Jimmy Bartell, the Geelong footballer. He's not going to have a haircut for a whole year, and when people ask him why, I'll say it's to raise attention to the problem of family violence.
Absolutely, and that's a great example of a role model and a person who's prepared with his family to discuss the issues within their family and to come out and make a stand. And they are the sort of people we need to actually highlight this issue, but also to actually educate our children about how they actually challenge this issue as well.
OK, Alice, there are going to be a lot of people watching this program tonight who are themselves caught up in the maelstrom of family violence, either as victims or indeed as perpetrators. Where do they go for help?
There's a range of services available in Victoria. Probably the best ones to start with are the National Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Counselling Line, which is 1800-RESPECT. Safe Steps, which is a 24-hour crisis service for women experiencing family violence, and the Men's Referral Service, which is any male can contact that.
So, Paula, any final thoughts?
Well, I think we've got a big job ahead of us, but I also feel like there's a real political will and a social determination to do something about this issue. I think now's the time where we can make some really big changes. It's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of money, but I think it's something we need to do to move on as a society.
Dean?
And the report's fantastic and it gives us a great pathway to and a way forward. But the reality is we're always talking about the issues that we know. I'm actually concerned about what we don't know. Those women and children who are absolutely suffering in silence, how do we reach out to them? How do we make them confident and safe to report so we look after their welfare?
Well, hopefully a few of them will be watching our program tonight. Alice, your final thoughts?
Look, I agree with what Dean said. I mean, this report provides a platform for us to really change the system to make it more responsive to women and children so that they can achieve safety and security. And at the end of the day, these recommendations will all work towards allowing a system that will provide that for women and children.
Well, I want to thank you all for your contributions today. We all do what we can, of course, and I think at the end of a big week, you've made a big contribution to a big problem. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. We intend to leave you on a positive note with voices from the No Excuses Choir, a project that's grown quickly after some Victorian women affected by family violence were given the opportunity to be heard. Their stories have been turned into song by co-directors and composers Christine Green and Kathleen Maguire from the Choir of Hard Knocks.
A victim no more, let the healing begin. Opening doors, peace will come from within.
One person's story of family violence is everyone's story.
Will be a new start, let the healing begin. Oh, a victim no
Without exception, all the women we spoke to in gathering the stories for the songs wanted us to leave everyone with a message of hope and inspiration so that they would have courage to stand up for themselves and to not be afraid to tell their story.
They've said how it's changed their life, how that they have become more confident. When we sang in Bendigo last week, we got a standing ovation from a house of 900 people, and I was a bit blown away by that. Yeah, I didn't expect that at all. What's happened is that it has come to feel like something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. There's something in the time and in our society at the moment that is a shift. You can feel when a time's favourable for something to happen, for a different awareness to come.
It's about making making no excuses. And we don't want excuses from people who are committing violence, and we don't want excuses from society who makes excuses for those people. We also don't want to, as individuals, make excuses for the harm being done to us.